The Tamer is Repulsive. Level 19. The War Under the Mountains. 7. King Gilder Ironheart the Ninth looked over a magical map of the city. He could see the blue dwarf-controlled areas shrinking and the red rattan-controlled areas growing in real time, and it made him curse aloud. He would not let his kingdom fall, and he would not let the last great wall protecting his kind from the vicious ratmen be taken. He needed reinforcements, the sooner the better. As it stood, however, he had no expectations of a grand rescue. The ambassadors from the other Under Kingdoms had long since fled, promising much but delivering nothing. They had fled months prior, mere days after the hellish scream echoed through the whole of the underground. Anyone with even a lick of common sense could tell that it meant trouble, and any dwarf worth his ale would know that such a shriek meant that the rats were going to hit hard. He had expectations that some of his people would come to aid him and his, but not a soul showed up, even at this late stage of the conflict.
"If we somehow manage to endure this, I will have dozens of grudges to settle,"
the Dwarven King grumbled as he saw another line of defense buckle and cave, a streak of red quickly punching a bulge into a blue zone. His attention switched from the map to a slip of paper in his hand, a letter from a certain Morgrim Nobeard.
"I certainly hope you can deal with this. We have all our hopes riding on you, so by the grace of the ancestors and by the powers of the gods, succeed. If you fail, if you fall, then all is truly lost."
Rupa's attention was forced on the reports coming in. An entire force of her elite troops had been one-sidedly butchered by what seemed to be beardless Beardthing. Said Beardthing had simply appeared from nowhere, bypassing the senses of those around it, and then proceeded to effortlessly rip a detachment of her personal army to shreds. Needless to say, she was livid. She stopped swinging an armored Beardthing around and into its own kind like a fleshy flail and tossed the broken being aside. She began to dash towards the sounds of her own personal army in trouble. She knew every one of their voices, and the sound she heard made it clear that they were in far over their heads. Just as she arrived, she saw the fading form of a beardless Beardthing looking back at her with a mix of contempt and satisfaction on its face. As she stepped into the place where the beardless Beardthing was, she swore she could hear a snicker in a voice that seemed familiar. She couldn't place where she had heard it before, only that she had heard it a very long time ago.
"Squeak!"
she bellowed, only for the rattan in question to appear, locked in battle with a beardless dwarf. The two of them popped in and out of various places, connecting their blows with blocks of the other. It was, to put it in a way a comic book fan might understand, like seeing two far more murderous copies of Nightcrawler trying desperately to kill each other. The two of them vamped in and out of place through the entire war zone, with neither of them getting the upper hand. Ripper tried to follow the random teleportations, but to no avail, and she ultimately consigned herself to not being able to kill the beardless wonder. She was not wanting revenge for the slain, but merely wanting to vent the frustration and anger she felt over having her pawns killed so easily. She would have to up the training regimen and work with Snickety to get more powerful pups. It was nothing a bit of selective breeding and copious amounts of magicite-infused steroids couldn't solve. Grima had managed to get Ratbot working again, and she piloted the mech toward the battlefield. She was very late to the party, and this angered her greatly. Sure, she had dealt the Colossus, but since that point she had been unable to participate as her attention was focused on getting her machine up and running again. She could feel the burning gaze of the Vermin Queen on her as she worked, which stressed her out and inspired her to work faster. Ratbot was now moving at top speed toward the ruined Dwarven fortress city, and anything that got in its way was crushed underfoot or smashed aside by the chainsaw-tipped war glaive it carried. Must reach fighting! Can't risk her rage wrath! Have to distinguish myself or face distraction, yes! With every other glance being over her shoulder, Grima pushed Ratbot's movement's ability to the absolute limits. She knew better than to let other weaker rattan outdo her in terms of accomplishments. She could not permit anyone other than another member of the Five-Clawed Paw to outshine her. "No time! Must move! Go faster!" As Ratbot reached the front lines and smashed a bloody swath through both ally and enemy alike, Grima continued to panic as she drove the massive mechanical rat centaur construct toward the central dwarven keep. Killing the rank and file was not enough to keep her from oblivion. Or so she thought. No, she needed to take a bigger prize of much more valuable heads to hope to stave off the wrath of the Vermin Queen. Snickety stood on top of the spire that was in less of a destroyed state than the other structures around it. She was at the highest point for miles around, and she could see the fighting raging around her for quite a distance. She giggled to herself and opened a bag made of leather and removed something that she and Grima had worked on. It was a tiara-like piece of headwear that would only be usable by someone or something with the head of a rattan, and one the size of those of the members of the Five-Claw Paw. She placed the device on her head and felt the pain of needles jabbing into her flesh and connecting to her nerves. She closed her eyes and opened them. Her beady red eyes were now glazed over, and she held her hands aloft. The macabre constructs of flesh, bone, and sinew that she had brought to the fight suddenly stopped moving, only to start again as Snickety began to wave her arms like a conductor of an orchestra. Her fingers twitched as she swung her arms and hands about, and her tail twitched as it too danced in the air, undulating in seemingly random motions. Snickety was directing the movement of every creature she had brought to the fight. The wolf rats, the rat trolls, the abominations, and more became nothing more than an extension of her will, utterly subservient and acting as just another limb, eye, ear, mouth, or nose. Snickety's pseudo-hive mind let her control the uncontrollable and steer the mad monsters she had formed into whatever direction she saw fit. With a unified mind and purpose, the savage monsters that had been brought to bear against the beer things hit harder, more accurately, and with more cunning and brutality than ever before. At the edge of the dwarven fortress city, a hulking figure strode through the hole in the last wall. With every step it took, the area around it began to twist and reshape. The very air became corrupted and sickening as emerald sparks and flames popped in and out of existence, and the very architecture around the creature began to alter itself. As the rat-covered figure with glowing, sparkling, and burning crystal horns entered the ruined city, its gaze swept over the destroyed monuments and icons of a once great nation. Under its hood, its emerald-colored flames for eyes were filled with glee as its mouth twisted into a sinister smile. It pointed its right claw out toward where the fighting was taking its place, and far behind it strode 4 10-meter-tall rattan warriors that seemed to have come from the smaller one's shadow. The 4 massive rattan colossi sped off toward the fighting, as the rat-covered smaller one merely walked forward at a leisurely pace, opening portals along its path to help it traverse the vast distances. The 4 towering summoned monsters reached the front line just before the Vermin Queen did, and as they went about smashing the resistance the dwarves could offer with a mix of rogue, mage, and warrior abilities, the Vermin Queen merely walked through the ongoing carnage as if nothing was happening around her. Any dwarf that managed to approach her was killed in excruciating agony as emerald flames and electricity danced over their bodies and glowing green cracks ran through their flesh. No one could get close, not even her own subjects. All who tried had fallen, and no one had managed to step foot within 30 feet of her without paying a terrible price. She had said not a single word as she silently strode through the parting sea of combatants, making her way toward the very edge of the city where the keep stood defiant. That structure was the last thing keeping her and her subjects from overrunning the underground and both slaughtering and enslaving the savages who had taken her most prized and precious object of her affection from her. She would not let them get away with it. She would hunt their leaders and rulers down, one by one, and force them to reveal the location of her precious husband-king. And if they could not give her what she wanted, then she would torture them until they did. She and her kind knew both how to prolong life and how to make it unbearable. They knew how to keep someone just shy of breaking irreversibly for decades and even centuries on end. Such torments were too lenient for these bastards, but they would have to suffice until she found her beloved Vale, the one whom she and the rest of her kind adored so much. Her flames for eyes condensed to the size of a dime as she focused her sight to allow her to see all the way to her goal. and with a single gesture, a massive bolt of green and tropic lightning flew toward the wall that protected her foe. As it impacted and sent Rebel flying, her hideous visage once again contorted into an insidious grin, and she kept walking toward the keep, unfazed by anything happening around her.